There's a minor feat remembering to hit the record button. So, welcome everyone to the Buddhist Path of Awakening as we work our way through the profound treasury of the ocean of Dharma, the digest of Trungpa Rinpoche's 15 years of teaching seminary every year for 3 months. And these talks that he gave each year were digested by Judy Leaf into these 3 volumes. We are on volume 2, part 5, Emptiness and Compassion. And tonight we're dealing with chapter 20, entitled Emptiness and the Middle Way, as we continue on into this magical and profound world of emptiness, Shunyata. So Michael is going to start this evening. Sir?
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. And we're continuing to read the chapters in the section of the book titled Emptiness and Compassion. Tonight's subject matter really deals mostly with emptiness aspect. I appreciated the opportunity that preparing for this talk gave me to look through a lot of notebooks and material that I haven't looked at in a long time. And it reminded me that, in fact, when at seminary during the study period, which was the 2-week period of Mahayana where Chogyam Trungpa gave talks on the Mahayana teachings, there were also other classes that took place with advanced students. And one of the topics covered was the Madhyamaka. I actually found my old notes, and so I have proof in my own handwriting that we did cover Madhyamaka as part of seminary. In any case, I'd like to begin with a quote that I found actually from a talk by Joseph Goldstein, where he said that all practices, all Buddhist practices, can be summed up in one line from the Diamond Sutra. And that line is, develop a mind that clings to not. And that does apply to all practices, but in particular applies to the Madhyamaka teachings that we're going to be discussing tonight, developing a mind that clings to not. And going even further, or carrying that to its end, this also includes not clinging to not clinging. That not clinging in the beginning might apply to eternalism, but not clinging to not clinging would also apply to nihilism. So we'll be talking about that in a few moments. Madhyamaka means middle way. And the idea is that it is the middle way between a position of eternalism and a position of nihilism. So develop a mind that clings to not. And that's the key point of Madhyamaka reasoning, meditative contemplation, Madhyamaka debate, Madhyamaka analysis. And in terms of taking that just a little bit further, I want to read a quote from the previous text that we studied, Trungpa Rinpoche's Path of Individual Liberation, about Vipassana and Prajna, that I think really applies to what we're doing in applying Madhyamaka reasoning to our practice. And what he said, this is from The Freshness of Unconditional Mind, chapter 43 in the Path of Individual Liberation. Vipassana is referred to as insight or the seed of prajna. Vipassana practice includes the contemplative approach of pondering the Dharma intellectually, as well as the meditative approach of the development of awareness. In the contemplative practice of Vipassana, speculative mind is used as a way of looking beyond oneself. You have certain ideas and conclusions through philosophical speculation. You try to create further ideas and conclusions in order to transcend oneself. You are venturing out into different ground than the ground you find secure. When you find it very confusing to understand things, rather than formulating new ideas to make sure you have some ground to stand on, the Buddhist approach is to take a further leap and create your own nest in space. So that really sums up what Madhyamaka is about as a practice. Where Madhyamaka cuts the ground out from under us, dissolves any sense of reference point, any sense of fixed view. So to begin the chapter, Trungpa Rinpoche introduces us to Nagarjuna, who was a great Buddhist practitioner, philosopher, Mahasiddha, who lived around 200 AD. Wikipedia says 150 to 250 AD, so we'll take the average. And as Trungpa Rinpoche says, he wasn't just a professor or a scholar, although he knew a lot. Since Nagarjuna was a great practitioner, any arguments Nagarjuna presented could be regarded as the voice of experience. Nagarjuna was somebody who presented his experience very simply and directly. So it's important to keep in mind, as conceptual or philosophical as some Madhyamaka arguments might seem to be, that they really are grounded in experience, and meditative experience at that. Trungpa Rinpoche goes on to say that Western scholars tend to misinterpret the nature of Buddhist philosophical traditions and logical systems. Madhyamaka is not a philosophical school in the Western sense, so it's a disservice to say that Nagarjuna was the founder of a particular school. And he goes on to say this is because these traditions are not regarded as established institutions or philosophical schools. They are just forms of truth. Again, they are just forms of truth that people happen to discover and present. So, of course, this brings us back to threefold prajna practice, where we hear, contemplate, and meditate. So it's up to us to work with these teachings in such a way to decide whether we find them to be true for us personally. But in essence, they're just forms of truth from a Buddhist point of view. Anyway, Trungpa Rinpoche goes on to say that learning Buddhism was approached as one organic whole. So it would be good to drop the concept of philosophical schools and view Madhyamaka not as a philosophical school, but as a system of thinking. He says a philosophical school develops arguments to protect its own concepts and ideas, while a system of thinking is a process of presenting a certain viewpoint very harmoniously and systematically to people's minds. So that's what Madhyamaka is. It's a system of thinking, and it's a process of presenting a certain viewpoint very harmoniously and systematically to people's minds. Hopefully, I will be able to be at least somewhat harmonious and somewhat systematic myself, but that's what Madhyamaka is. So just to give a little bit more background about what Madhyamaka postulates, what Madhyamaka says is truth. Basically, the idea is that all experience phenomena, everything we encounter is empty, or as a characteristic of Shunyata. This doesn't mean that we don't experience them and that they're therefore non-existent, only that that they don't have a permanent and eternal kind of substance in themselves. Because like a dream, they're projections of human consciousness. Again, like a dream, they're our sense of apparent reality, the apparent reality of ego, of dharmas that we talked about last week, is a projection of human consciousness. And since these fictions are actually experienced, they're not just mere names. But for Nagarjuna, it's not merely that sentient beings are selfless or egoless or non-substantial, but that all phenomena are without its own being, without self-nature, without inherent existence or inherent reality, and thus without any underlying substantial permanent essence. They're empty of being independently existent. I'll try to give some examples of that in a moment, or sort of what I understand that means, which will hopefully be helpful. Sometimes it's talked about in terms of being empty yet existent as appearance emptiness. And an example of that, for instance, there are different analogies traditionally, such as the analogy of a mirage. So perhaps you've had the experience of driving on a road and seeing what looks like water on the road ahead of you. You can see it, it's clearly there. It shimmers and reflects like water, but it doesn't actually exist as water. You can't drink it, you couldn't water flowers with it. So it appears, yet it's empty of any reality. In the same way, another analogy that's sometimes used is the illusions that a magician creates that depend on certain causes and conditions that are put together to create an illusion, like that a rabbit comes out of an empty hat. So it appears, but it's empty of real existence, empty of any kind of inherent self-nature, you could say. So the idea of Madhyamaka altogether is that in the end, we have no fixed reference points, and whatever reality things seem to have is imputed or projected, again, in a dreamlike way by our consciousness. So one example that some teachers use to show what this means, that some things don't have inherent reality, I have my props, I went outside and collected them, is here we have a short stick and here we have a long stick. But now the long stick is the short stick. So what a Madhyamakaist would be trying to show here is that long stick, short stick doesn't exist in the sticks themselves. It exists in what we project onto the sticks, or what we believe are true of the sticks. If we only have these two sticks, then this is the long stick relative to the shorter stick. But now the long stick is the short stick, and this is the long stick. So that reality isn't, things don't have their own being, self-nature, inherent existence. And it's said that all phenomena are like that. So that there aren't any fixed reference points that we can say. You could say that what Madhyamaka does is to take the Hinayana truths that we have discussed previously about the inherent impermanence of all things and the interdependent, interconnected nature of all things, and apply that to show that things don't have their own existence, their own self-nature. And in some cases, this is talked about, there are a lot of examples of this in Madhyamaka reasoning. One of the ones that I found kind of interesting was the whole notion of up and down. That for me, where I am right here, this is up, this is down. But if we were to go all the way through the earth and assume that we end up somewhere in Asia, then whoever that person is, this is actually up. And down for them is up for me. So that again, what we take as these very fixed reference points in the world are in fact dependent on all kinds of causes and conditions, and are not as solid, not as real, not as fixed as we take them to be. There are actually different schools within the Madhyamaka, which I don't want to get into too much, except that overall, what Madhyamaka reasoning tends to do is to take different logical points of view, different kinds of things that we take as reference point, and reduce them to absurdity by looking at them and really taking them to the end of what they would mean. So that, for instance, one of the Madhyamaka points of view that we discussed when I was at seminary is a Hinayana point of view in certain Hinayana schools that things exist of particles that, although they don't exist in the way that we believe they exist, that these fundamental particles, like atoms, are truly existent. And what Madhyamaka does is to say, well, how can these particles be indivisible? If they have a top and a bottom, they can be divided into top and bottom. And you keep going until things get smaller and smaller, and you realize that it's just an endless chain. So that in the end, the point is to let go of fixed mind, to let go of fixed views, beliefs, and reference points. That Madhyamaka uses conceptual mind, you could say, to undermine conceptual mind, because at some point you have to let go because of the absurdity of the view. One analogy that's given sometimes in the teachings for how Madhyamaka works is it's like rubbing two sticks together. So we take two dualistic thoughts and work with them to start a fire, which in the end consumes the sticks as well. So that what's left in the end is just awareness, open awareness, or more specifically prajna, knowing. And that can't be pinned down either. So that we're able to let go of reference points. So that's just a little quick and dirty, I guess, introduction to some of the Madhyamaka reasoning. So the next section in the text is entitled Neither Eternalism Nor Nihilism. And Trungpa Rinpoche says the reason that Madhyamaka was known as the middle way is that Madhyamakans were neither eternalists nor nihilists. And he says that eternalists believe that life exists eternally in spite of birth and death. So some texts actually will talk about eternalism as belief in permanence. And again, it's on a conceptual level, we can say, what do you mean life exists eternally? I know that I'm going to die. But the real question is looking at what we tend to believe and how we actually behave. And to look at how in our actions and our thinking, with eternalism in particular, how we cling to things that we think are real, things that we think have some kind of fixed identity, and think that we have some kind of permanence to them. So we can conceptually say that I don't have a self, and yet there are certain things that I cling to, I'm at least speaking for myself, as if there was some kind of ongoing permanent continuity to my existence. Just in the same way, I assume that tomorrow is going to be more or less like today, a certain fixed reference point in terms of my life, where I live, what I'm going to be doing, and so on and so forth. This is eternalism. This is some sort of belief that things have existence, that it has some continuity, some kind of permanence to it. And then nihilism is the kind of the opposite. He said, Trungpa Rinpoche says, nihilists believe that everything comes and goes in the midst of unconditioned space. So there's room to make mistakes, room to correct things. There's also room to indulge, room to expand our ego. We're on our own, whatever we do. And since everything is in our hands, we can do whatever we want. So we should stop hassling with our life. We should forget about chaos, practicality, and earthboundedness. Instead, we should just enjoy and celebrate nothingness or emptiness. So this is what happens when we cling to some sense of nothingness. We begin to think that nothing really matters. It's just some kind of present in which I can do whatever I want with no kind of consequence for the future. That there's no absolute, no real meaning to anything that I do. No kind of consequence to anything I do. So what Trungpa Rinpoche says then is neither the eternalistic nor the nihilistic approach is particularly safe or right. Eternalism is as confused as nihilism. The traditional analogy is that as long as you fall off the horse, it doesn't matter if you fall off the right side or the left side. Similarly, you are a nihilist, whether you're a nihilist or an eternalist, you are making a wrong judgment about reality. Actually, there was one Tibetan teacher, I forget who said something to the effect that people who believe in eternalism are stupid as cattle, but people who believe in nihilism are even stupider. And one reason for that is because nihilism ignores the reality of karma, or cause and effect. And so the kind of hedonism that Trungpa Rinpoche describes, or I suppose maybe perhaps a more extreme form of nihilism might even be something like sociopathy, can lead to really horrendous consequences. And it's still clinging to a belief. It's still clinging to a fixed point of view. Anyway, the next section of the text is titled Discovering Shunyata with the Tool of Prajna. And Trungpa Rinpoche here says, the idea of Shunyata, or emptiness, is discovered by Prajna. Shunyata is not quite the same as the existentialist concept of emptiness, and it's not made into a concept, and it is not made into a concept put into a box and cataloged. And he repeats this again later in the text, that Shunyata is not quite the same as, is not made into a concept, not put into a box and cataloged. And then he quotes the Uttara Tantra Sutra that says the basic nature is empty of adventitious stains, which are separable, but is not empty of unsurpassable qualities, which are inseparable. And he goes on to say about this quote, the basic nature, which is fundamental awareness, fundamental wakefulness, prajna. He says that makes a lot of sense. The basic nature, which is empty of dualistic fixations, this is what we overcome through Madhyamaka reasoning, is regarded as this real supreme dharma. Adventitious stains or dualistic fixations are temporary. They do not actually hamper the basic enlightened state of mind at all. So conceptual mind and mental concepts are not regarded as permanent damage. We realize the temporariness of such experiences, and we are not alarmed by dualistic problems. We recognize that they do not have any kind of ground to stay. So this experience of emptiness is ultimately what allows for compassion. For instance, when we do Tonglen practice, it's because things are fundamentally empty, devoid of a true inherent permanent nature, that we're able to take on the suffering of others and let go of whatever it is that we have. that we think might be helpful in such a situation. It's through the realization of emptiness that we can express true compassion, because we're completely open and because we don't have any fixed views, any kind of hesitation, any kind of personal hang-up. And this quote about the basic nature of being empty and any kind of obscuration being temporary is very similar to what we read before in chapter 5, Basic Goodness, in this book, where Trungpa Rinpoche says, in Shamatha Vipassana, we look at our basic state of mind and experience it fully, and we regard any obscurations or obstacles as temporary. Instead of looking for trouble or for problem areas, we look for that naive state of existence that we always possess. And even at the Hinayana, your mental stains and discursive thoughts are not regarded as permanent problems. So another aspect of why Madhyamaka reasoning works is because any kind of fixed view, reference point, any kind of dualistic fixation is only a temporary obstacle. It's not inherent to our state of mind. Whereas the unsurpassable qualities, which for the moment we'll just say wakefulness, prajna, compassion, those are inseparable from our fundamental nature. Anyway, he goes on to say in regard to shunyata and prajna, that shunyata, this is again a reminder of what we read last week, that shunyata is what you experience and prajna is what you use to discover shunyata. Prajna is like a cup that you use to drink water. Shunyata can only be contained in prajna, and he says it's like the hollow of our hand. He goes on to say prajna is a way to see. It is like a kind of radar system that is trying to perceive the phenomenal world in the language of shunyata. And then prajna is supreme knowledge, but in this case, knowledge does not refer to something you already know, as when someone knows how to fix cars. It is not that kind of preconceived knowledge. Prajna is the capability of having knowledge. Knowledge of what? Of nothing, just knowledge. So again, the prajna refers to just the knowing quality. When we're able to, in meditation practice, through engaging with Madhyamaka reasoning, let go of fixed mind, let go of reference point, let go of any kind of concept of what things are, then we just experience prajna, just knowing. I found in my notes, interesting, another comment on prajna, that Suzuki Roshi called prajna readiness of mind before it has a view and latches onto a view. And so that working with prajna is going back to that state of readiness, recognizing and resting in that state of readiness, and not trying to reduce what we see or solidify what we see to fit our concepts. So we're talking about different ways of understanding prajna, which Madhyamaka reasoning helps to awaken. Trungpa Rinpoche goes on to say, the problem with linguistics is you have to qualify things all the time. You cannot simply say it. You can't just have an unconditional it, but you have to have somebody or something that's referred to as it. But in the case of prajna, knowledge is not knowledge of something, it's just knowledge. Prajna is the faculty to know. It is the faculty to know in the fullest sense. And he says it does not involve computation or comparison. And finally, he says, Shunyata, emptiness, is neither religious nor secular, neither sacred or profane. It is what it is. It is the first clear thinking about reality in the human realm. The only mind that can perceive true Shunyata is the human realm, the world of opportunity. So this is something that we work with in terms of our practice. And if I could just read at the end what I read in the beginning about Vipassana, that Vipassana is referred to as insight or the seed of prajna. Vipassana practice includes the contemplative approach of pondering the Dharma intellectually, as well as the meditative approach of the development of awareness. In the contemplative practice of Vipassana, speculative mind is used as a way of looking beyond oneself. You have certain ideas and conclusions, and through philosophical speculation, you try to create further ideas and conclusions in order to transcend oneself. This is what we do with Madhyamaka practice, Madhyamaka reasoning. You're venturing out into different ground than the ground you find secure. When you find it very confusing to understand things, rather than formulating new ideas to make sure you have some ground to stand on, the Buddhist approach is to take a further leap and create your own nest in space. So that's what we do. We take a further leap. We let go of conceptual mind and just rest in the state of knowing that is prajna. I think that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Michael. So I'm going to just cover a few things as well. Just a couple of facts. Nagarjuna did supposedly live around 150 to 250 AD. There's another version of his life in which he lived not a normal lifespan, but actually 900 years. In that version, there are many stories about him. And but it's undeniable that he is the person who rationalized and sort of made logical and explained the Prajnaparamita teachings. The Prajnaparamita teachings preceded the Madhyamaka. They're usually dated around anywhere from 250 BC on. And the Prajnaparamita teachings are the ones that, the one that you're probably familiar with is the Heart Sutra. Thus have I heard, once the Blessed One dwelling in Vajragriha, and so forth. And it ends with Gate, Gate, Paragate, Parasamgate, Bodhisattva. And there's a whole body of literature called the Prajnaparamita literature. Prajna, again, is that aspect of knowing that is non-dual, that transcends I and other. And paramita means transcendent virtue. And it's the sixth of the paramitas that develop, well, it's actually there from the very beginning of the Bodhisattva Path. The path can't be traversed without Prajnaparamita. But it was presented in the Prajnaparamita literature. And then really what happened was that around 150 to 250, Nagarjuna was one of the first Buddhists to explain it, to rationalize that literature, the Heart Sutra and the rest. And that's really what Madhyamaka is. As Michael said, Madhyamaka means the middle path, and it's the middle between eternalism and nihilism. These are the two extremes that Buddhists offer. Eternalism is the idea that is really found in doctrines of theism. God is an eternal substance. The soul is eternal and unchanging. Nihilism, as it's presented in Buddhism, is very similar to Western existentialism that developed in Europe in the early 20th century and later, in that it holds that the end of life is the end of everything, and that there is no consequence. So it kind of takes the meaning out of everything we do in this life, because there are no consequences after we die. We don't go to heaven, we don't go to hell, there's no punishment, there's no judgment. It's all just over. So you can kind of live this life in any way you choose without any consequences except what you might incur during this life. And this was expounded by people like Sartre and Camus and others. So Madhyamaka, in being the middle path between these two extremes, is not a middle conceptual system, like a compromise between eternalism and nihilism conceptually. Rather, what it's saying is that we can live our lives experientially, free of conceptual explanations and designations. That at any moment, there is the experiential aspect of our life and the conceptual aspect. So right now, you're looking at a computer screen, and you can call it that, a computer screen. And it has all these implications of the keyboard and everything else that goes along with it, and is it working well, and so forth. Meanwhile, there is the immediate experience that each one of us is having. The words that label it and the experience are different. The words are like labels, like tags. In fact, the Tibetan for concept can also be translated as tag, as though you were to write the word computer on a tag, scotch tape it to your computer. There's the reality of the computer, which is, rectangular, and it's metal, and it's got different colors and all kinds of things. You can touch it and so forth. And then there's the concept. that concept is really what eternalism and nihilism are all about. And it's what Madhyamaka is refuting. It's saying that no concept can actually capture reality. It's just a pointer towards it, like that tag with the word computer on it that is affixed to this computer. You go to the store, you see something, you don't know what it is, and then you say, oh, there's a tag and it says computer. That's a computer in that box. That's what concepts are for. They identify, they label aspects of our experience, but they are not the experience. That experience is the middle way. And in that experience is where Shunyata lies. And what Shunyata is devoid of, what it's empty of, Shunya means void, empty. Ta is a nominative. And what Shunyata is empty of is it's empty of concept. It means that our experience, our lived experience, is free of concept. Concept is just like a label that is temporarily attached. And the problem is, the samsaric problem, is that we begin to live the concepts. We begin to live the stories that are contained in the ideas. And a lot of what Madhyamaka is an attack on these concepts to show that they are not completely true at all. They're just, as one Buddhist scholar that I used to study, Herbert Gunthers, put it, concepts, relative truth, a useful way to take things. Useful at a particular time, place, under particular circumstances. That's what concepts are. So if you call a thing a hammer, it's because you want to pound a nail. It's useful to say, aha, this is a hammer for pounding nails. But if you're not pounding nails, what good is the word hammer, or the fact of it? So a lot of Madhyamakan philosophy, and that's what I sent out a couple of arguments, is aimed at showing the frailty of language, its inability to capture reality truly. And so you get all kinds of arguments, and Nagarjuna was actually a natural logician from a Western, more advanced logical point of view. If you study modern logic, the arguments that Nagarjuna came up with intuitively are there, formalized in modern logic. Reductio ad absurdum was one of the arguments that I sent out. There are other arguments called modus ponens, modus tollens that he uses. These are Latin for arguments that go, I'm not going to bother you with how they go, but in any event, he was a natural logician, and he used logic to destroy the credibility, as it were, the believability of the absolute truth of language. I've always felt that listening to Nagarjunian arguments, that the fundamental problem that he was attacking is the interaction between nouns and verbs. Because nouns are static. You talk about a pen. A pen is a pen is a pen. But a pen writes. And in writing, it's dynamic and it's changing every second. Now it's here, now it's there, now it's got more ink, now it's got less ink. Everything is like that. Nouns and verbs, they're constantly in conflict. The idea of a thing moving, it's already changing. If I'm walking down the street, I'm different at every single step. And yet to say it's me, it's John, well, it's an idealization. This person doesn't actually exist in an ongoing way. He's a constant changing. That's what we all are. And reality is a constant changing, a constant evolution. And so Madhyamaka is trying to point this out, that what we experience really is beyond concept. Concept is just a useful way to take things at a particular time and place for particular people. And then it's not useful anymore in other circumstances. So prajna, in this context, becomes very clear, lucid knowledge. It's the knowledge that sees the way things are in the moment, stripped of the conceptual designations, especially stripped of judgments and valuations, all of which are arbitrary and peculiar and idiosyncratic to me. I think a thing is good, you might think it's bad. It's just idiosyncratic to each one of us. Prajna is seeing things stripped of those conceptual overlays, whether it be a name like computer or table, or it be a judgment like good or bad or beautiful or ugly, all of which, especially the judgments, are very idiosyncratic and personal to the person using them. Prajna sees things, as they say, as they are. The expression in the Sanskrit is ta, as it is, stripped of the conceptual overlays. So he says, Shunyata is a state of realization of our phenomenal world, is in an experience, and it could be considered a practice or a discipline, because we come back to it again and again. We come back to the understanding that we gain through Madhyamaka, through understanding what Shunyata is. We come back to it and we actually begin to live it more and more. Shunyata is usually defined as the lack of existence of a self, I, and the lack of existence of others, anything other than I. The others are always called dharmas. This is from the Hinayana teachings, where everything that arises as Michael was saying, as atoms, little experiences. Herbert Gunther, again, he called these atoms, there might be an atom of brown, there might be an atom of sweet, there might be an atom of courage, there might be an atom of fear. That these are atoms of experience, and that they only exist for a split second, these atoms in Hinayana doctrine. They arise and they pass away in roughly a 60th of a second. They are the atoms of our experience. Shunyata says they don't exist. They're a myth. They are an arbitrary designation, an arbitrary labeling of experience. In fact, atoms, and these are called the dharmas. And that's why in the doctrine of the twofold egolessness, we talk continually about the egolessness of self and the egolessness of dharmas. Dharmas are the other. They are the things that arise in the moment and disappear. According to Hinayana doctrine, the Abhidharma, these things last for maybe a 60th of a second. One traditional explanation for how long they last, they say if you were to stack 60 flower petals and drive a pin through them, the amount of time it takes for the pin to pierce one flower petal, that's how long a dharma lasts. And what Shunyata is saying is they're just another concept. They are just another dream, as Michael was saying, a dream created by the mind. That in fact, all that ever happens is this, in the present moment, a constant mirage, as Michael was saying, a constant presentation, a constant fluxing. There is one constant that exists, and that is Buddha nature. Now, Michael mentioned briefly that there are two schools of Madhyamaka, and the difference between them, we're not going to get into this now, is one that asserts the existence or the true validity of Buddha nature and one that denies it. The one that denies it is so radical in its denial of anything existing that it denies even Buddha nature, awakening, enlightenment. But the other school, which is called the Zhentong school of Madhyamaka, asserts that Buddha nature in fact exists. And this carries on into Tantra, because the one thing that you can't say it exists, but it is continuous, is consciousness, awareness. We are continually in a state of awareness, and it's not even we. It's just that there is awareness. Right now, there's awareness of this room, this voice, the feeling of your bottom on whatever you're sitting on, the thoughts that are going through your head that come into awareness from moment to moment. That awareness is continuous. The contents of it change. In fact, the awareness, you can't even find it. It's just like a river flowing. At any given point, there's nothing left of what was there an instant before. And yet there's a continuity within that change. This is the experience that we have of life, a continuous change. And yet there is continuity in the change. These words flow, this gesture continues and ends, and a new one begins. That continuity is carried forward into the Vajrayana teachings, and it is literally the meaning of the word Tantra. Tantra literally means continuity, and it's referring to this continuity of experience, which you can't find anything that continues, and yet there is a constant flexing, a constant changing, like a river flowing. So, experiencing emptiness, he says, that everything is bounded by this totality. And what is experiencing the emptiness? It's coming back to this same thing that I'm talking about, this continuity of awareness. In the Tibetan, it's called rung rik. Rik means to know non-dually. It's not I and other knowing. And rung is self. And what they're saying is that everything that arises in this space that we inhabit is self-known. It's constantly in a state of awareness. These sounds, these words, these pictures that we're looking at on the screens, all the things that the six knowables, the objects of the five senses and the objects of mind, all of these things arising and passing momentarily, always, are self-known, rung rik. And that self-knowing is really the core of prajna. Prajna means to see things in that non-dual way as they truly are, stripped of concept. Concept is just a useful way to take things, like a tool, like your hoe for tilling the earth. It's a useful way to communicate with other people, but it's not true. It's not absolutely true. It's just useful at a particular time and place. He says, emptiness, this emptiness we're talking about, empty of concept, is not about vacancy, but about the absence of clinging, beyond which is greater freedom, a much clearer, unpossessed state of being. It is total spaciousness, which you cannot actually label. Once you label it, you begin to lose it. So what's happening is that in this world of emptiness, Shunyata, there's tremendous freedom. We're free of concepts. We're free of the rules that these concepts imply about how we behave with each other and how we treat ourselves. There's tremendous freedom, and also there's tremendous vividness, because when we begin to see the world stripped of concept, we begin to see it much more vividly. Those concepts are like sunglasses that blur out, that fade out the brilliance and the vividness and the color of the world. And so we begin to enter a world much more magical, much more vivid and colorful, and much more full of joy and delight. He says, space or spaciousness means fullness. That fullness has a positive quality in the sense of sanity, and it has a beautiful, colorful, full, vivid quality. Once you are sane, meaning free of these constant, myths that we carry around with us and believe in about ourselves and the world. Once you are sane, you are bombarded all the time by all kinds of possibilities. And then he says, Shunyata requires that you be willing to give up your culture. Your culture are all the beliefs and values that we hold to, that we think are so important. And we're stepping into a groundless world, a world in which the values are immediate, present in this world. They're not things that are laid on like a system of ethics or morals that we have to carry around with us. And so we're both free of those systems, and we're able to see the world in a much more vivid and true way. He talks about the necessity of the Buddhist culture, that it's the path, that we use it, but we use it conditionally. And it's really a self-destructive path. There's a Zen slogan. In the end, there is no Buddha, there is no Dharma, there is nothing profound. It's like Buddhism is, I always think of it, my dad, when I was a kid, taught me about the wiffle bird. I know I've told this story before. The wiffle bird is a bird that flies in ever decreasing circles until it disappears of its own anus. And I've always thought this is a great analogy for Buddhism. It's a philosophy that goes just like that. And in the end, what we're left with is life, this life, for whatever it is. But we do need to subscribe to this conditionally, this culture of Buddhism, because it's this self-destruct journey into living in life. He says, it is necessary to have some kind of culture or tradition, but as long as you realize that you are not functioning on fixed ground, as long as ego's territory has been eliminated, Mahayana practices such as the paramitas do not become new forms of cultural fixation. We're not going to become good Buddhists, like would be good Jews or good Christians or good Democrats or good Republicans or whatever it might be. Buddhism is not about that. And I always think of, the idea of things not existing, not having their own true existence. Just to elaborate a little bit on Michael's point, the term in Sanskrit is sva bhava. Bhava means being. Sva means own, O-W-N. And what Buddhism says is that nothing has its own being. Nothing has sva bhava. I think Michael said it very well, but the three main characteristics to keep in mind of what are being denied, of bhava, existence, are one, that something is ongoing through time without change. So the rock is a rock is a rock, and there's John, and he's going to be there tomorrow, and he was there yesterday. This isn't true. Everything is constantly changing to the point where you can't find what it was. It's not there anymore. It's like dominoes going over. There's a continuity within the change, and yet nothing lasts for even a split second. The second characteristic is that things are independent. They have an independent existence, like God. He doesn't need anything, right? He doesn't need you and me. He doesn't need the world. God just exists, independent of everything. And what Buddhism says is nothing exists independently. Everything exists independence on everything else as part of a matrix. This matrix that we're sitting in, full of colors and shapes and sounds and all of it interpenetrating and interacting. And the third quality is that things are unitary, which is pretty much saying the same thing again. God would be unitary. The soul is unitary. It's one thing. And what Buddhism says, as Michael pointed out, is that even when you look at something like an atom, it has sides, and it's not unitary. It has parts. And physics has dealt with this endlessly in quantum physics too. But the idea of atoms being subdivisible not only into neutrons, protons, and electrons, but then those particles being subdivisible into quarks and on and on and on. You can't find the last one thing. There is no one thing. So these are the three qualities that are being denied. And basically what's being denied is I and other, that these two things don't exist. When I and other exist, then we have endless problems. We have the problems of the relationship between I and other. Do I like it? Do I not like it? Am I indifferent to it? The three poisons. And these bind us. These cause us suffering. And these enslave us. Then he says, with Shunyata, you realize that the emptiness of phenomena, dharmas, others, and the emptiness of self is the same emptiness. It's just this world, this space that we can move into. Not even we. It's just that it's constantly happening, evolving, vividly, full of color, amazingly so. When we talk about emptiness, we are not talking about vacancy, but about the absence of clinging. Beyond clinging, a greater freedom can be experienced, a much clearer, unpossessed state of being. It is total spaciousness. And more than that, when you empty out the concepts of I and other and everything that accrues to those two concepts, then this world, all of the arising of the six knowables in the instant, in the moment, becomes very rich, beautiful, and very meaningful. And so really, when we give up this neurosis and we step into the world of Shunyata, we think of Shunyata means voidness, emptiness, but really it's a tremendous fullness. And this is talked about too. We will come to this in the teachings. It makes possible an enormous fullness of life. He says, now coming to this next section, Bodhisattva's prajna and emptiness. Bodhisattvas develop prajna not only by meditation, sitting meditation, which is very important, but also by actions, by relationships, by working with the world. Because when we begin to come back into awareness, into prajna, as we move through the world, it has an even more powerful effect on us than it does in sitting practice, which is kind of like sitting is the lab. You're in a lab experience. Being out in the world, you're bringing the prajna to bear into real reality. You're out not in a lab anymore, and it becomes much more powerful. He says, Bodhisattvas are not using concept to understand and interpret the world. They see with the naked eye of prajna clearly. It's a different order of knowing. This prajna, it's not a faculty. It's here. It's something we remember, we come back to. It's the clarity beyond concept that we can come back to again and again. Here he says, and I think he's speaking about himself and other people I've known, Bodhisattvas do not have to use their own concepts to judge somebody else. Their realization is beyond the conceptual framework mentality of dealing with reality. And then he says, and you've experienced this yourself and in others. Bodhisattvas can see through you because they do not have to use double vision. Double vision is seeing with concepts as well as just nakedly. They don't have to use double vision. They are just there without anything. They can see with the naked eye. And you've been around people who seem to see you beyond the projection that you want to give them. And it can be embarrassing. I think many of us always felt stripped naked when we walked into the room with Trungpa Rinpoche, and it was slightly scary and frightening. Although he was just sitting there, he wasn't doing anything particularly. He says, Bodhisattvas do not have any preconceptions, and you keep building up your little paddings, that means us ordinary people, which keep falling apart. When you communicate with a bodhisattva, that is usually what happens. Your little paddings keep falling apart because this person is seeing you as you really are. And if you keep trying to maintain the mask, the lie of who you want to project you are, it becomes very uncomfortable. The last section is called A Continual Awakening of Prajna. The confirmation of the spiritual journey is the experience of awakening from samsara into nirvana, and this is produced by the continual development of prajna, which is coming into the real world out of confused, anxious dreams. Prajna is constantly cutting through and providing further inspiration to practice. When we begin to see with the eye of prajna, we begin to experience freedom. Freedom from what? Freedom from should, freedom from ought, freedom from I must. Because prajna has nothing to do with any of those. And when we begin to realize prajna, it's realizing that what prajna is already here. It's already here. It requires no effort of us. All it requires is an acknowledgement, a coming back, a recognition, a waking up to what is already here. Prajna brings about further prajna. So you experience a continual awakening of prajna. In the Mahayana, what prajna exposes are egolessness, the lack of me, shunyata, lack of I and other, and compassion. Shunyata and compassion go together, two sides of the same coin. When you begin to step into the openness and the beauty of the world of emptiness, compassion naturally arises. It's a quality of that world. And then he says you take the Bodhisattva vow because you realize that continuing on the path of fixation is problematic. You begin to get the answer to your question about what is beyond fixation, which is shunyata. And in shunyata, there's nothing else to do except to relate to the world as it arises in the present moment, which is relating, which is actually being of benefit to others. The ultimate benefit, because you're communicating, you're embodying. If you embody shunyata, you're embodying reality, truth, freedom, the beauty of this life. He says, in this same vein, you begin to realize that you do not have to be dualistically fixated of I on I and other. That enlightened power of Buddha nature is in you already, so you can enter the Bodhisattva path. What an amazing, it's like we're giving in. We're giving in, we're succumbing, we're surrendering to this truth. We can't believe it. We keep saying, no, 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 no. I have to be doing something. I have to be making myself better. Finally, I'm just going to close with this. You can inherit the sword of prajna, but it requires devotion, which comes from renunciation, which comes from the recognition that you are already impregnated with Buddha nature. So really the order is, let's reverse that. You recognize that you're already impregnated with Buddha nature. You begin to sense that, experience it in moments. And this inspires you to renunciation. And what renunciation means doesn't mean giving up money or food or sex or anything like that. What renunciation means is you're giving up the I-other game and coming into this groundless, open space of awareness. And this produces devotion. And devotion is really the love of the Dharma and the love of the lineage, which has communicated this to us down through the ages. And then finally, that means that you inherit the sword of prajna, the sword of clear seeing in this present moment. It's quite a message, this message of the Mahayana, a message of freedom and of the beauty of life, with all of its dog shit, death, everything is included. And yet it's fundamentally gorgeous and worth being here for. So we could have a discussion in the time we have remaining. You're muted, Michael.
Oh.
Christy?
Okay. Yeah. I wasn't sure if we were raising hands or what we were doing. Thank you so much, John. And these are just beautiful just thank you so much. My question is about the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And I guess when I'm sitting here thinking about nihilism and eternalism, it sort of felt to me like the Tibetan Book of the Dead sort of felt eternalist in some ways, like just this idea that there's a part of us that goes, the consciousness that sort of continues on, in a really continuous way. So I'm hearing some feedback from somewhere. Okay. So I just wondered if that maybe came from like part of the Madhyamaka that, was more about continuity, of experience, or I don't know if I'm even making sense about that, but I just felt like maybe it wasn't as maybe radical in terms of like the ways Shunyata can be presented. And I wondered if there was, that you could speak to that in any way. You lose me.
Michael, shall I or you?
We should both try it. It's sort of like volleyball. I at least hit it off, and then you can try to hit it over.
Yeah, good.
I think what you're asking is, what is the continuity of rebirth?
Okay, there you go, Michael. Thank you so much.
I think that's what you mean.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's what I mean too. I'm trying to.
Right. Well, there's different way. I guess it's an interesting question, and I think ultimately it's one of those things that's kind of ungraspable, but I'll try to grasp it anyway.
Thank you.
Supposedly, Trungpa Rinpoche, when somebody asked him, "What is it that's reborn?" he said, "Your bad habits."
Okay.
But basically, I think that a real understanding of the Book of the Dead is you really have to understand impermanence, and how even moment to moment in our the bardo of our present life, from moment to moment, there's a seeming continuity, but our experience is actually discontinuous. That from moment to moment, where we die and we're born and die, in terms of moments of consciousness. And that what happens in the Book of the Dead is obviously we lose, the biggest reference point of all, our bodies, but that consciousness continues to work in that same way. That there, from moment to moment, there's death and rebirth in each moment of consciousness, in each moment of experience, and that there's a continuity, I guess you could say, in terms of karma, but really the only thing that ultimately is our awareness. And if we recognize that, we can be liberated in the bardo. And if we don't recognize that, then we continue in rebirth, just as we do in our lives now, perpetuating patterns of ignorance. So at least that's my attempt to hit it up in the air. Maybe John can hit it over now.
Well, that's great.
I'll show you. I want to share something. Some of you may remember Robin Isaacs, who came to our meditation group in the mornings for a while. She was very sick. She had cancer. She passed about 2 months ago. She died of cancer after struggling with it for 24 years. Let's see if I can share this. She was my cousin. Can you see that?
Yeah.
That's her at about 18. She was sitting in my house in Boulder, here in Boulder. And the basic idea is that nothing stays the same, even for a split second. I mean, consider this. Every cell in your body is gone every 7 years. There is nothing in this body that was there 8 years ago. And yet there's a continuity in the change, one thing leading to the next, to the next. I mean, when we saw her in meditation, you could see the continuity with that 18-year-old. It's like dominoes going over, like water flowing. You can't find anything that was there 7, 8 years ago. And yet there's a change, a continuity in the change. That continuity is the real meaning of the word Tantra. That's what Tantra means, continuity. You can't find it. It's not a thing. There's a constant streaming of change. Nothing adheres. Everything is constantly disappearing and being replaced by the next thing, the next gesture, the next word. Words disappear in silence, they're silence. The Book of the Dead, so-called, the actual name of that text is Achieving Liberation Through Hearing in the Bardo. It's called the Bardo Tudor. It was given the name the Book of the Dead by an early Western translator in the 19th century who wanted to popularize it. And so he stole that title from the Egyptian canon of religious texts and slapped it on the Bardo Tudor. And it's really about, if you were to be given instructions on how to drive your car, or how to navigate some changing circumstance in your life, that's what the Book of the Dead is. It's trying to give us instructions on how to navigate the change that's going to come. The biggest change in the life of a sentient being is the loss of the physical world, which is what death is, the death of the human body. We lose this body and we lose all our senses and we lose the world for a period of time. And so it's explaining the series of changes, just like the changes that we might go through as we grow up and grow old. Where is that 18-year-old anymore? Even when Robin was still alive, that 18-year-old was long gone. There wasn't anything left of her, and yet there was a continuity in the change. Certain aspects, the tone of her voice, that southern accent she had, she grew up in Louisville, Kentucky. And that's the real issue. There's nothing that you can point to that lasts, and yet there is a constant flexing, like that.
I'll just add one more thing one other thing I was thought about including in the talk tonight, but didn't, is that a lot of times we create a sense of continuity through the stories we tell about ourselves. Like I could tell you a very coherent story about how I ended up in Connecticut, how I ended up being a psychologist, and so on and so forth. And it makes sense looking back. But if I actually think about many of the different points in time, I had no idea what I was doing. I had no idea what was going to come next. So the sense of continuity is projected afterward. But if we actually go back, it's more like a dream, and that one thing led to another, but in a really groundless way. And I think that's probably true for all of us.
Yep.
Well said.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks, John. It's just beautiful teachings. Thanks.
Shunyata is such a gorgeous teaching. And the experience as we begin to move into it is even more gorgeous, because it brings freedom, beauty, love, joy into our lives.
There's a footnote in this chapter that you could refer back to Appendix 4 for Prajna dialogues, and I don't know if people had a chance to read those, but they are transcripts of questions and answers between students and Trungpa Rinpoche. So if there isn't an immediate question, I thought I might read one.
Great.
Okay, so student asked the question, is there a knower of Shunyata? And Trungpa Rinpoche says, no, otherwise it wouldn't be Shunyata. Questioner, okay, then what sense can it be said to exist independent of idea or concept? Trungpa Rinpoche, because it is independent of concept. Nobody is at home. It is very simple when you realize that nobody is at home. Questioner, yes, but nobody is at home is a statement that is bounded by concepts. Trungpa Rinpoche, sure, definitely so. Questioner, so we are not talking about Shunyata, but are we talking about something that we substitute for Shunyata? Trungpa Rinpoche, at this point, we're not talking about Shunyata from the point of view that nobody is at home, but we're talking about the possible fever of Shunyata. Hearing that there is nobody at home to help you and that the house is completely empty, you could be panicked. There is no ground, although you are on some kind of ground. There is a fever of Shunyata. From there we go on. Questioner, in that case, you would not really say that Shunyata exists? Trungpa Rinpoche, that's the whole idea. You cannot say that Shunyata exists. That would be a contradiction. And you cannot even say that it non-exists because you have no idea whether it exists or not. It is total experience. Questioner, does the concept of Shunyata come from Shunyata occurring in somebody's life and then going away, after which they have sort of a flavor of the memory and then try to describe what it was? Is that how the concept of Shunyata, is that how the concept of something that doesn't exist or non-exist arise? Trungpa Rinpoche, no. Questioner, no. Trungpa Rinpoche, no. It is like a dead man telling us a story. It is like a dead man describing to you what it is like being dead. Questioner, well, as someone who is telling us about Shunyata, isn't that what you're doing? Trungpa Rinpoche, yes, I suppose so. Questioner, well, that makes it rather frightening. Trungpa Rinpoche, people died when the Buddha taught about Shunyata. They had heart attacks. All kinds of drama about Shunyata took place.
I think we ought to do the Heart Sutra in morning meditation for a little bit, don't you think, Michael? That might be a good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Heart Sutra is all about this.
Yeah, but in morning meditation? Before the class, certainly.
I think we could do it. We have an hour. I mean, what's it going to take? 5 minutes?
I love the Heart Sutra.
Heart Sutra is gorgeous. See, the Heart Sutra is all about this idea of dharmas. They're like atoms of experience. And it's saying there are none. And there are all these classifications in the Hinayana teachings of the dharmas. There are the 5 skandhas. That's one organization of the dharmas of experience. Then there are what are called the 12 ayatanas, which are the subject-object idea, like, you see through, a visual object with the eye. And then there are the 18 dhatus, which says that the mind looks through the organ of the eye and sees a visual object. So that's three dharmas: the mind, the eye, and the object. And all of these are arising in a moment of vision, all 3 of them. And same thing with hearing and the other senses and the mind. And so they list about, different schools of the Hinayana listed different experiences, dharmas, that you could have. And they came up with different numerations: 112, 98, 75, different numbers of the experiences that one could have in life, and that these things actually existed, if only for a split second. And what the Heart Sutra is doing is it's saying, nope, no, they don't exist. And so it says, what does it say? No form, no feeling, no perception, no formation, no consciousness. There go the 5 skandhas. No eye, no ear, no nose, no throat, no body, no mind, no appearance, no sound, no smell, no taste, no dharmas. And there go the 12 ayatanas. No. And then it even goes, no suffering, no origin of suffering, no cessation of suffering, no path, because we tend to concretize these things. There go the 4 noble truths. It's all describing this world of where nothing has any true existence, and yet everything appears. And so there's this slogan that you might remember that I've repeated before. It comes from from tantric practice. And when you do some tantric practice, you might do this. The slogan goes like this: things do not exist, right? And yet they arise. They arise, and yet they do not exist. It's a miracle. It's miraculous. This is the way it is. This is a description of our lives and our experience. Nothing exists, and yet things arise and appear. They arise and appear, and yet they don't exist. A constant display that we're living in the middle of. Well, anybody else before we sign off? Mark Eskenazi.
Hi, it was a wonderful talk, great talk. There was something I wanted to bring up, and it's a little, for the end, a bit much, but this book I've read several times, The Magic of Awareness by Anam Thumpton. And there's one paragraph that I think really, for me, to be free of concepts really is a wonderful, it's like just a paragraph. Can I read it?
Please.
Thank you. This is Anam Thumpton talking. He said, one time a woman told me that she had been on the Buddhist path for many years, but she never quite understood the Buddhist concept of the sacredness of all things. She asked me to explain it. This was difficult to answer from the top of my head, no matter where I looked. I couldn't come up with even one word that would logically explain it. Then she told me that one day she watched her son collecting things that had washed up on the seashore. They were precious jewels to him. At that moment, she thought, perhaps we can understand the sacredness of all things by seeing through the innocent eyes of a child. All I could say to her was, yes, just like that. And I think it goes on, but I think that's what, as far as free of concepts, to be able to look at the world like we're looking at it for the first time. That's how we would appreciate our meditation. That's the goal to me. Anyway, that's it.
Thank you, Mark. That's beautiful. Well, friends, shall we say the closing chant? No? Anybody else before we go? That was beautiful, Mark. Thank you. Reminds me of a poem by Wordsworth. It's an ode, Intimations of Immortality. And it's really all about how, with the eyes of childhood, we see the world magically and beautifully. And as we age, become adults, it disappears. Gorgeous poem. Anyhow, oh, here we got one. Barbara Corbett, the last comment, then we'll go. Barbara, you froze.
If things don't, oh, okay.
You're
Sorry about that.
we're here, you're here now.
Okay. If things don't exist, how can they appear?
I guess a true Buddhist, like a Madhyamakan, would say, it's because they don't exist that they can appear.
Because they don't.
If they existed, they'd be frozen, like you were for a second.
So because they don't exist, they can appear.
Maybe. What do you think, Michael? Am I going too far?
Well, because they're not fixed, because they're not, but it's because of, Madhyamaka goes a lot into, because of causes and conditions, things seem to appear in a certain way, but they don't exist in a ultimate way. That was the point of, for instance, when I was talking about something as seemingly ordinary as up and down, is actually relative to causes and conditions. So it seems to exist as something absolute, but it's not absolute at all. It's relative to causes and conditions. And when the causes and conditions change, up and down change, long and short changes. So that there's an appearance, but it's because of interdependence. And it doesn't really have any inherent identity, any kind of permanent identity. But I think any more than that, we should save for tomorrow night's discussion group.
Good, thank you.
Well,
You got out of
that's
that well. Okay, let's say the
Thank you.
closing night, everybody.
Okay,
I'll put it up on the screen, I think.
I have it if you. I can
Good,
do
you
it.
do it, Michael.
Okay,
Thanks.
let's see. By this merit, may all obtain omniscience, may it defeat the enemy wrongdoing, from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great East, may the lotus garden of the Rignan's wisdom bloom, may the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled, may all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory. Thank you, everyone.